Over here, Noah says, why do people like precise timing? What is the appeal of frame perfect timing in games? As these increase in precision, my anxiety and frustration only grows. I feel the hair standing on the back of my neck. How are Royal Guard, ESEN, and Lynx any different from QTEs without button JPEGs on the screen? No matter how many I've played, it's never clicked on some universally satisfying level. I've been playing Onimusha 2 on my PS2 recently. I've been struggling to understand the appeal of the ESEN mechanic. At first, it presents a fun and satisfying way to dispatch enemies, but as enemies become more difficult, the timing becomes tighter, and the battles become a guessing game of which fraction of a second is the correct one to press square. I ignore most of the other mechanics because despite the frustration, ESEN feels like the intended way to master these encounters.
Okay, so as somebody who went through all the Onimusha games, ESEN is not the intended way to go through most encounters. ESEN is a substantially more difficult risk reward scenario that is put in there to encourage mastery of certain enemy types.
I was going to say I only played
However,
one, but yeah, that's the impression.
in two, it gets significantly more powerful, but it's still a huge risk reward. The reason why people gravitate towards these kinds of systems is a measure of a mental state called flow, which is not necessarily specific to video games. It actually refers to almost any task that has a certain level of difficulty. In the bar graph that is rising difficulty versus rising competence, there's a perfect sweet spot engaged in which you feel what is called a sense of flow, in which you are perfectly being matched by your task, and flow feels good, and it actually helps you perform much better. Games tend to have a problem with this because the difficulty that leads to me being in flow with any particular encounter is not the same as, say, for Wooly. If we're talking about Onimusha, right? I played all those games so I would get into flow more easily in Onimusha 3, but Wooly, you only played the first one once, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would have a harder time compared to another person who maybe isn't quite as familiar with action games would
Max
find
acting.
it right, would find it much more difficult to get into a sense of flow. And comparing to people who have played every Onimusha game till they fucking die, they can't get into flow because it can no longer rise to the level of challenge required, which is why people like that actually tend to gravitate towards stuff like rhythm games because they need more precise to get that same rush.
Now, flow is an interesting variable to introduce into the equation here. That's a great explanation. I like that a lot. That is, and what you didn't mention there, but it feels really good to get into
Yeah,
that
it's
state.
pleasant. Flow is
Um,
pleasurable, and mastery feels satisfying.
so, you know, that is that's satisfactory. What I'll do is I'll go the opposite direction on that and answer the other side of the question, which is, what is the difference between what we're seeing in these high precision moments versus a glorified QTE sequence? And I'd say that if you really want to think about it, if you break a game down far enough, just about everything that it asks you to do could be considered a QTE sequence if you drag it out far enough. If you're playing
Yeah,
Mario 1 and you have to jump over a pit in that first stage in 1-1, there's a point at which jumping will result in failure, and then there's a range at which jumping will result in success. And that can be a very slow, very deliberate, as the screen moves at your own walking forward pace, QTE sequence. The idea of timing in games is something that just can get more and more demanding as time goes on. But uh, in that idea in and of itself, that like it's just without the button prompt or so, is something that you're being asked to do in games all the time, usually by the more advanced levels. I mean, the dragon, or not the dragon, the blocks that appear when you're fighting the dragon in Mega Man 2 are asking you to react very, very quickly. That in a way that is comparable to kind of some of the features you're describing there. It all fits into the state of like not this. It all fits into the same idea of like it is a rewarding feeling upon mastering that. It is a rewarding feeling upon getting it for the first time. And not it is understandable that not everybody is going to have that, but I think that any challenge that requires any kind of timing whatsoever can fit into what you described as like a type of QTE. It's just that is what games are kind of asking you to do when there is a moment where something fails and then that window goes away.
So, if you are having kind of a difficulty parsing either the gut intuitiveness of either of the things me and Wooly are talking about, I think you would agree that the easiest way to see it is there are two games that I think of right off the top of my head that perfectly encapsulate a feeling of flow. The first of which is Devil May Cry. Pick a good one. There are many. They have a fucking meter on the screen that might as well just say level of flow. And the second of which is your classic Tony Hawk games, in which it is about reaching like this perfect in between state of the difficulty of what you're pushing to do and the music and all these things. It's a nice state.
A
People are
recent
also saying Doom Eternal.
Doom Eternal and a recent entry into this would be Sifu.
Yeah, Sifu, absolutely.
Um, it's a wonderful feeling that not every game asks of you and not every game can offer. But when you do experience it, you're like, oh, I like this. I'd like to experience that again. And yeah, I think that kind of explains why those games are designed that way. Um, yes, it can be considered reductive to like look at to say everything is a glorified QTE. That's not a incorrect statement,
I
but
mean, that's the same kind of logic that people look at every single video game that uses positive reinforcement and go, "That's just a fucking Skinner box."
right. But human beings are different, so again, it's absolutely not going to hit everybody the same way. The other thing too, of course, is if all of that has to mesh with a personality style, I suppose, or a temperament that is that has a larger threshold for failure, you know, or rather has developed a larger threshold for failure, because I don't want to imply that you're either patient or impatient and that's the way you are. It's more as if you've done this activity and kind of like you've learned what it is, I suppose, to try the same activity again a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and you know, get that reward. It's funny because I actually tried out Bennett Foddy a little
Oh,
bit, and I like how it starts out by saying to you, "Hey, if you're kind of having a bad day or just not in the mood to really, you know, kind of deal with rough feelings right now, maybe come back and try this another time." You know, and that's pretty like I'm like that's a pretty honest ass thing to say, you know. And then I played it for a bit and I was like, oh yeah, this is absolute rage bait as a game.
oh
Um,
yeah, 100%.
you know, and you can't ask everybody to go that far. You can't ask everybody to you know, experience that. It's just it is absolutely going to be something that not everybody enjoys. However, you don't have to make it so that it's binary and that the only way to experience the game is just that or not at all. Some games do, but you also have games where they allow you to achieve that at like peak design you know, flow as intended, but you can still succeed by achieving brief moments of flow enough to beat a boss and get to the next level, you know.
Yeah.
And asking people to do that is a more reasonable ask and can oftentimes entice them to try getting to try challenging themselves to get into the flow state more often, you know.
You know, it reminds me, and if anybody who's watching the live broadcast can hit me with the name of the YouTuber who put up this video, it reminds me of a term that you have used about FF14 being the FGC retirement home.
Mm-hmm.
And this gentleman put up a video trying to discover, like, legitimately what the fuck is up with that. Like, why is that so common? And the hypothesis that he went with is that there's two genres that fighting game players tend to gravitate towards when they tone down fighting games. One is kind of FF14 by itself, and the other is rhythm games.
Yeah.
And the explanation that is people are saying it is Matt from Bellular Gaming.
Okay.
Bellular Gaming. And basically, he equates banging out your rotation in FF14 specifically to a rhythm game.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you hit those inputs feels good the way that a rhythm game would. And I would agree with that. Which makes sense that fighting game players who are getting a little bit older to be like at the bleeding fucking edge of competition, but still like the feeling of learning like physical dexterity mastery of tasks are going to kind of gravitate towards these things
A combo.
because as their competence decreases, they need something more laid back to hit that level of flow.
And the best example of that is Desk, who makes combo videos that are musical, and Desk
Yeah.
plays music and makes music and plays fighting games and blends the two and shows the rhythm of like how a combo can be musical and can resemble the same tasks that would be asked of you in a rhythm game. Doing a long Marvel combo sequence can absolutely rival, an extended sequence in a Beatmania game with what you're doing with your hands, and then once you get better at it, you get more precise with it, you get better timings down, you know. Yeah, it absolutely appeals to the same centers of the brain that are getting pleasure in the fighting game. And when you're done with, and if you move on to another genre and you find that genre gives you those same little like, ooh, I like that feeling, then you're gonna be attracted and gravitate towards that. I hope that answers your question satisfactorily, Noah. All right,
All right, everybody, be safe out there.
take it easy.
Don't leave placeholder text in ways that be embarrassing.
Happy soon to be Juneteenth.
Yeah, happy Juneteenth, everybody. Bye.